I got to tell you, I really like these hearings where we're learning all kinds of interesting information and where we have to figure out how do we make the system better from our positions in Congress. So, Ms. Anderson, let me ask you, in your testimony, you described how the auto ISAC was recently subpoenaed by an entity looking for all communications between the auto ISAC and one of its members. While the subpoena was ultimately rejected, you stated that the incident itself was troubling. Why was the situation problematic? And if you know, can you tell me? Because I know the judge ruled that it was just a fishing expedition, but what were they looking for?
They were looking for any communications between that member and the ISAC, which there were a lot of nuances behind it because actually the ISAC didn't exist when the alleged incident occurred. So they were just kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall. But the concern, as I mentioned, is that if there is a trend for going after ISACs for a one-stop shopping for information, that could be detrimental to information sharing.
And I do understand that. What specific protections exist or may be necessary to limit the negative consequences of this type of incident or subpoena?
If there was some way that you know, Congress could help protect that information that gets shared confidentially amongst the members, because as we were talking a little bit earlier with the lateral sharing, trust is a key factor in that, and that's the beauty of the ISACs. They are trusted communities. So being able to protect that trust is absolutely key.
And I tend to agree that there ought to be some level of protection, but then I've also heard testimony and discussions today that make me think that maybe we ought to put some limitation on that. So if we have that communication limited, but we said if there's clear or convincing evidence that would indicate that there may have been malfeasance or intentional tortious action, would you agree with that? And let me explain that so folks, I know y'all get it, but if we've got a fear that insulin pumps or pacemakers or something else may be vulnerable, and researchers share that with the ISAC, and ISAC notifies the medical device production company or the company that's made it, and they take no action, and then there comes harm to some individual, obviously there you have, you know, a knowing, an understanding that they're risking people's lives by not taking preventative actions. And I would want that information to be able to be shared after a judge ruled that there was some pretty good evidence that something like that happened. Would you not agree with that?
I would agree with it definitely to some extent. I think the information that gets shared within the ISAC probably would not even follow along those lines, okay, because we're sharing malicious IP addresses, and we're sharing malware, and we're sharing phishing emails and subject lines and things like that. So I believe personally that product liability issues probably will not be a factor in something that would want to be collected.
I guess I was thinking in that direction because there was an indication that some of the information that I saw indicated that there was a device that researchers found a vulnerability, and instead of going to the company, they went to a hedge fund.
Yes.
I would want them to share that through some mechanism with the company so the company could fix it.
Correct.
And then I would want it protected up to that point, but then if the company chose in a total disregard for safety, chose to ignore that information, then I would want that information to be available.
Yes, I would agree with you.
Okay. And if we craft something like that, you'd be all right with that. But you do think there needs to be something that makes it clear they can't just come on fishing expeditions every day, because it makes it expensive for the ISAC and makes it troublesome for the companies who are trying to share info.
Absolutely.
All right, I appreciate that. Mr. McNeil, Mr. Rice, on those situations that I put forward, do you all have any suggestions, comments, advice?
Well, I think the first one is, at least with the manufacturers and the researchers, with the example you gave, if we are following the post-market guidance, which the FDA has issued, it would allow us to have more of that coordinated disclosure. And in the event that that coordinated disclosure does not take the fruit that it should bear, then yes, I would be supportive of what you've stated in terms of appropriate requirements from the government associated with that.
All right. And I should note before Mr. Rice speaks that I believe it was your testimony that said some nice things about the FDA, and oftentimes we're only dealing with problems in this committee, so it's nice to hear some good things too.
Thank you.
Mr. Rice.
The only other point I would add is that after the Computer Information Sharing Act of 2015 that was passed, we actually did see an uptick because there was some rudimentary liability protections that were put into that act. So I do believe Congress has a role in helping to foster these sharing communities.
I appreciate that very much, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yields back. Now recognize Ms. Schakowsky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seems to me that not only are we faced with cybersecurity